August 17, 1954, 3:47 in the afternoon. The Arizona desert stretched out like a burning ocean of sand and stone, and Bumpy Johnson was 2,000 miles from Harlem, driving a rented Buick down a road that seemed to lead nowhere. The temperature was 109 degrees. The air shimmered like water that was not there. And that is when Bumpy saw something that made him slam his brakes so hard the car fishtailed in the dust and nearly rolled into the ditch. At first, his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was exhaustion from driving 14 hours straight. Maybe it was the loneliness of that empty road playing tricks on his vision. But when the dust settled, when Bumpy stepped out of that car and shielded his eyes from the brutal sun, he saw it clearly. A wooden cross, maybe 8 feet tall, planted in the sand about 200 yards off the road, near the base of a red rock formation. And tied to that cross, arms stretched out, head hanging forward, was a girl. She could not have been more than 16 years old. Her long black hair hung in matted ropes across her face. Her wrists were bound with barbed wire to the crossbeam, and the wire had cut so deep that blood had dried in dark trails down her arms. She was wearing a torn cotton dress, once white, now stained red and brown with blood and dirt. Her feet were bare, her ankles bound the same way as her wrists. She was not moving. Bumpy Johnson had seen violence in his life. He had seen men killed in front of him. He had ordered violence. He had survived violence that should have ended him a dozen times over. But standing there in the Arizona desert, staring at a child crucified in the sun like an animal left to die, Bumpy felt something he had not felt in 30 years. He felt rage so pure it was almost holy. And that is when the girl lifted her head. Her eyes opened, dark eyes filled with pain and fear, but something else too, something that looked like defiance. She was alive, barely, but alive. Bumpy ran. He ran toward that cross faster than he had run in years, his expensive shoes filling with sand, his suit jacket flapping behind him. When he reached her, he could see the full horror of what had been done. She had been there for hours, maybe longer. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Sunburn had blistered her face and shoulders. The barbed wire had cut so deep into her wrists that he could see the white gleam of bone in places, and around her neck, hanging from a leather cord, was a hand-painted sign. Just 2 words: Indian whore. Bumpy did not hesitate. He pulled out his pocket knife and started cutting the wire. It was slow work. The barbs kept catching, and every time he pulled, the girl whimpered, but she did not scream. Not once. She just looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to be asking a question she was too weak to speak. When her right arm came free, she nearly collapsed. Bumpy caught her, held her up while he cut the left wrist loose, then her ankles. When she was finally free, she slumped against him like a broken doll, weighing almost nothing. Bumpy carried her to his car. He laid her across the back seat as gently as he could, then drove. He did not know where the nearest hospital was. He did not know where the nearest town was. He just drove, pushing that Buick as fast as it would go on that empty desert road, watching the girl in his rearview mirror, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in any more that she would keep breathing. What nobody knows, what the history books will never tell you, is that the next 72 hours would set in motion a war that would leave 11 men dead and change the power structure of 3 states. And it all started because Bumpy Johnson did what Bumpy Johnson always did. He protected the powerless from the powerful. He stood between the wolves and the lambs, even when the lambs were not his people, even when the war was not his to fight. To understand why Bumpy Johnson was in Arizona in August of 1954, you need to understand what was happening in Harlem that summer. Bumpy had been having health problems. His doctor, a man named Samuel Hayes, who had been treating Harlem's elite for 30 years, had told Bumpy that he needed to get out of New York. The stress of running the streets was taking a toll. Bumpy's blood pressure was dangerously high. His heart was showing signs of strain. And there were people in New York, powerful people, who were looking for any sign of weakness they could exploit. So Bumpy decided to take a trip. Not to Florida, where too many people knew his face. Not to Chicago, where the politics were just as brutal as New York. He decided to go west, to the desert, where the dry heat might ease his joints and the isolation might ease his mind. He told only 3 people where he was going: his wife Mamie, his right-hand man Illinois Gordon, and his attorney Solomon Jenkins. He drove himself because he did not want protection, did not want company. He wanted peace. He wanted to think about the future, about what Harlem would look like in 10 years, about whether there was any way to build something that would outlast him. He was 49 years old that summer, still strong, still sharp, but old enough to know that time was not infinite, old enough to wonder about legacy. The girl changed all of that. Her name was Sarah Whitehorse. She was 16 years old, a member of the Navajo Nation, and she had made the mistake of being beautiful in a place where powerful men believed that beauty was theirs to take. Bumpy found this out over the next several hours as he drove from one small town to another looking for help. The first town was called Dusty Springs, population 847. Bumpy pulled up to the only building that looked like it might have a doctor, a small wooden structure with a faded sign that said, Medical Clinic. He carried Sarah inside. The woman at the front desk, a heavy-set white woman with blue eyes and a permanent frown, looked at Bumpy carrying this bloody Indian girl, and her face went pale. Then it went hard. "We do not treat Indians here," the woman said. Bumpy thought he had misheard. "Excuse me?" The woman pointed to a sign on the wall, a handwritten sign that said, "No Indians, no coloreds, no exceptions." "This girl is dying," Bumpy said, his voice quiet, but carrying that edge that made smart people nervous. "She needs a doctor now." The woman reached under her desk. Bumpy heard a click. A shotgun being cocked. "You need to leave, mister. Take that girl somewhere else. This is not our problem." Bumpy looked at the woman, looked at the shotgun, looked at Sarah bleeding in his arms. He could have made this woman regret every decision she had ever made. He could have shown her what happened to people who pulled weapons on Bumpy Johnson. But Sarah did not have time for that. So he turned around, carried Sarah back to the car, and drove to the next town. Same story. The next town after that. Same story. 3 towns, 3 refusals. 3 times Bumpy Johnson was told that a dying child did not deserve medical care because of the color of her skin. By the time Bumpy found someone willing to help, it was almost nightfall. A Navajo trading post 40 miles off the main road, run by an elderly man named Joseph Bearclaw and his wife Margaret. They took one look at Sarah and immediately went to work. Margaret was a traditional healer. She cleaned the wounds, applied poultices made from plants Bumpy did not recognize, gave Sarah water mixed with herbs that brought some color back to her face. Joseph set Sarah's left wrist, which had been broken, probably when they tied her to the cross. Through it all, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words in a language Bumpy did not understand. Bumpy sat with her. He did not know why. This girl was not his family. This was not his fight. He should have left her with these people and continued on his way. But something kept him there. Maybe it was the sign around her neck. Maybe it was the way those 3 towns had looked at him, seen his black skin, and decided he was not worth helping either. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe Bumpy Johnson just could not walk away from a child who had been tortured and left to die. At around midnight, Sarah woke up fully for the first time. She looked around the room, saw Bumpy sitting in a chair in the corner, and her eyes went wide with fear. "No, no, please," she started to say, trying to get up, trying to run. Bumpy held up his hands, showed her he was not a threat. "Easy," he said softly. "Easy. You are safe. Nobody is going to hurt you. I found you on that cross. I brought you here." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes moved over his face, his clothes, the way he held himself. Then, slowly, the fear faded. Not completely, but enough. "You are not one of them," she said. It was not a question. "No, I am not one of them." Sarah started to cry. The tears came silently, streaming down her burned cheeks, and Bumpy sat there and let her cry. Because sometimes that is all you can do. When she was ready, she told him everything. Sarah Whitehorse lived on the reservation with her grandmother. Her parents had died when she was young, killed in a car accident that everyone suspected was not an accident at all. Her grandmother raised her, taught her the old ways, the old language, the old stories. Sarah was a good student. She wanted to go to college, wanted to become a teacher, wanted to come back to the reservation and help her people. But there was a man. His name was Vernon Keller. He was 52 years old, white, wealthy, and he owned most of the land surrounding the reservation. Cattle ranches, mining operations, a string of trading posts that gouged the Navajo people on every transaction. Vernon Keller was also a monster. For years, he had been taking native girls from the reservation. Some he kept for himself. Some he sold to other wealthy men in Arizona, New Mexico, even California. It was an open secret in the region. Everyone knew. The local police knew. The state officials knew. Nobody did anything because Vernon Keller was connected. His brother was a state senator. His father had been a judge. His money funded campaigns, built churches, paid for the new hospital in Flagstaff. Vernon Keller was untouchable. 3 weeks before Bumpy found her, Vernon Keller had come to Sarah's grandmother's house. He had seen Sarah at a trading post, watched her laugh at something her friend said, watched the way her hair caught the sunlight. He wanted her. He offered her grandmother money. When her grandmother refused, Vernon's men dragged Sarah out of her home while her grandmother screamed. For 3 weeks, Vernon kept Sarah at his ranch. What happened during those 3 weeks, Sarah would not say, could not say. Her eyes went distant when Bumpy asked, and he did not push. Some horrors do not need to be spoken to be understood. Finally, Sarah tried to escape. She made it almost 10 miles before Vernon's men caught her, and Vernon decided to make an example. He tied her to that cross himself, told her she would stay there until she learned her place, told her the vultures would teach her what happens to Indian girls who do not know how to behave, left her there with that sign around her neck. Bumpy listened to all of this without interrupting. When Sarah finished, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he asked one question. "Where is this ranch?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You cannot go there. Vernon has 20 men, maybe more. Guns, dogs. The police do everything he tells them. He will kill you. Bumpy Johnson leaned forward. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it that made Joseph Bearclaw, sitting in the corner, shiver. Let me tell you something about me, Sarah. My name is Bumpy Johnson. I have been fighting men who think they are untouchable since before you were born. I have gone to war with the most dangerous criminals in New York City and won. I have sat across the table from men who killed for pleasure and made them back down. The color of my skin means people have underestimated me my entire life, and every single one of them regretted it. He stood up. Vernon Keller is not untouchable. No one is untouchable. And what he did to you, what he has done to how many girls before you, that ends now. Joseph Bearclaw spoke for the first time in hours. Mr. Johnson, I understand your anger. We all share it. But you do not know this land. You do not know these people. Vernon Keller has been destroying our families for 20 years. Many have tried to stop him. They are all dead or disappeared. Bumpy looked at the old man. Then you have not had the right person trying. How many men does Vernon have? Exactly, Joseph thought about it. At the ranch, maybe 15 or 20, but he also has the sheriff and 6 deputies in his pocket. And there are men in town, business owners, farmers, who owe him money or favors. If it came to a fight, he could probably put 50 men together. And you? How many men could the Navajo put together? Joseph shook his head. We are not warriors anymore, Mr. Johnson. Not like our grandfathers. We have hunting rifles, old pistols. We have never organized against the white ranchers because we know what happens when Indians fight back. The cavalry comes. The government comes. They take our children, send them to boarding schools. They take our land. They find ways to destroy us that do not require bullets. Bumpy nodded slowly. I understand. But here is what you need to understand. I am not asking you to fight a war. I am asking you to help me gather information. I need to know the layout of Vernon's ranch. I need to know his routines, his weaknesses, his habits. I need to know who his men are and whether any of them have grudges against him. I need to know everything. And while you are gathering that information, I am going to make some phone calls. Because Vernon Keller is about to learn something that is going to change his life forever. Bumpy Johnson is not alone. The phone call went out at 2 in the morning. Bumpy drove 50 miles to find a payphone that was not in any town where Vernon Keller had influence. He called Illinois Gordon in Harlem. Illinois, Bumpy said, when his right hand answered, I need you to do something for me. Name it, boss. I need you to get on a plane. Bring Willie Jackson and Quick Lewis with you. Bring money, lots of it, and bring the package from the safe in my office, the one wrapped in brown paper. Illinois was quiet for a moment. Boss, that package is you know what it is. Bring it. I am in Arizona. I will send you the address. How soon can you be here? Illinois. Gordon arrived in Arizona 36 hours later, along with Willie Jackson and Quick Lewis, 2 of the most dangerous men in Harlem's underworld. They landed in Phoenix, rented a car, and drove through the night to the coordinates Bumpy had given them. When they arrived at the Bearclaw trading post, Illinois took one look at Bumpy's face and knew something serious had happened. Bumpy did not explain immediately. He introduced them to Joseph and Margaret Bearclaw, to Sarah Whitehorse, who was recovering but still weak. He let them see the wounds on Sarah's wrists, the fear in her eyes, the sign that Vernon Keller had hung around her neck. Then, when his men understood what they were dealing with, Bumpy laid out his plan. Vernon Keller thinks he is untouchable, Because he owns this region. He owns the law. He owns the politicians. He owns the fear of an entire people. But here is what Vernon does not understand. There is a bigger world out there, and in that bigger world, I have power that Vernon Keller cannot imagine. Illinois opened the brown paper package. Inside was a file, thick with documents, photographs, and names. This, Bumpy said, is every piece of leverage I have accumulated over 25 years in New York. Politicians who owe me favors. Businessmen who I have kept out of prison. Federal agents who look the other way. Journalists who will print whatever I tell them to print. We are not going to fight Vernon Keller with guns. We are going to fight him with something much more dangerous. We are going to fight him with information. Over the next week, Bumpy's plan unfolded with the precision of a military operation. First, the investigation. Joseph Bearclaw reached out to families across the reservation. Quietly, carefully, he gathered stories. 19 girls had disappeared over the past 20 years. 19 families destroyed. Some of the girls were never seen again. Others turned up dead, their bodies dumped in the desert. A few, like Sarah, survived but were so traumatized they could barely speak. The evidence was there. It had always been there. But no one had ever been willing to put it all together, to risk the consequences of accusing Vernon Keller. Bumpy put it all together. He had Willie Jackson photograph every document, every statement, every piece of physical evidence. Quick Lewis interviewed survivors, recorded their testimonies on a portable tape machine Bumpy had brought from New York. Within 5 days, Bumpy had a file on Vernon Keller that was more than 200 pages long. A file that detailed 2 decades of kidnapping, assault, murder, and human trafficking. Second, the pressure. Bumpy made phone calls, lots of phone calls. He called a reporter at the New York Times named Walter Brennan, a man who owed Bumpy his career after Bumpy had given him the exclusive on a police corruption scandal in 1951. "Walter," Bumpy said, "I have a story for you, the biggest story of your life. By the time Vernon Keller understands what is happening, you are going to be famous." He called a congressman from New York named Harrison Mitchell, a man who Bumpy had helped get elected in 1948 by delivering the Harlem vote. "Congressman," Bumpy said, "there is a situation in Arizona that requires federal attention. Human trafficking, local law enforcement, complicit. I need you to make some noise in Washington." He called a federal prosecutor in California named Thomas Reed, a man who had been trying to make a name for himself by going after organized crime. "Mr. Reed," Bumpy said, "I understand you are looking for a case that will make headlines. I have one for you. It does not involve me. It involves something much worse than anything I have ever done. It involves children." Third, the trap. Bumpy knew that Vernon Keller would eventually learn that someone was investigating him. He was counting on it. He wanted Vernon to know. He wanted Vernon to panic. He wanted Vernon to make mistakes. So Bumpy let information leak. He had Joseph Bearclaw mention to certain people who Bumpy knew would report back to Vernon, that a stranger from New York was asking questions, that this stranger had money, power, connections that reached all the way to Washington. It took 4 days for Vernon Keller to make his move. On August 25, 1954, at approximately 9:30 in the evening, 6 men pulled up to the Bearclaw trading post in 2 trucks. They were armed with rifles and shotguns. Their leader was a man named Hank Mercer, Vernon's foreman, a man who had personally participated in at least 5 of the kidnappings over the years. The old Indian and his wife, Hank told his men. Rough them up. Find out everything they know about this New York stranger, and if the stranger is there, kill him. What Hank Mercer did not know was that Bumpy Johnson had been expecting this visit for 2 days. Illinois Gordon was positioned on the roof of the trading post with a rifle. Willie Jackson was hidden behind the water tank 50 yards away. Quick Lewis was inside the trading post with Joseph and Margaret, armed with a shotgun, and Bumpy Johnson was sitting in a chair on the front porch, in plain sight, waiting. Hank's truck pulled up. The men got out. They saw Bumpy sitting there, calm as a Sunday morning, and they hesitated. They had been told the stranger was dangerous, but this man did not look dangerous. He looked like a well-dressed colored man from back east, out of his element, alone. "You the one asking questions about Mr. Keller?" Hank asked, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Bumpy did not stand up. He just looked at Hank with those cold, empty eyes. "I am," Hank smiled. "Wrong place to be asking questions, friend. Mr. Keller does not like nosy strangers." "Is that what he told you to say?" Bumpy asked mildly. "Or did he tell you to kill me?" Hank's smile faded. He glanced at his men. 6 of them, one of the stranger. "This should be easy. He told me to do whatever was necessary." Bumpy nodded slowly. "Then let me tell you what is going to happen. First, you are going to put your weapons down, all of you. Then you are going to get back in your trucks and drive away. And when you get back to Vernon's ranch, you are going to deliver a message for me." Hank laughed. "And why would I do any of that?" "Because," Bumpy said, "if you do not, you are going to die in the next 30 seconds. Before Hank could respond, before any of his men could react, a shot rang out from the roof. Not aimed at anyone, just a warning shot that kicked up dust at Hank's feet. Hank spun around, saw nothing. Another shot, this one from behind the water tank. It took the hat right off one of Hank's men's heads. "Now there are 3 rifles pointed at you," Bumpy said, his voice still calm. "You cannot see them. You do not know where they are, but I promise you, they do not miss." Hank's men were panicking now, looking around wildly, trying to find targets that were not there. Hank himself had gone pale. "You are making a mistake," Hank said, but his voice was shaking. "Mr. Keller will burn this whole reservation to the ground. You tell Mr. Keller that Bumpy Johnson sends his regards." Bumpy stood up. "You tell him that I know about the girls. I know about Sarah Whitehorse and the 18 others. I know about the bodies in the desert and the money he has been paying to keep the sheriff quiet. I know everything. And in exactly 72 hours, the New York Times is going to know everything too. You tell him that his brother the senator cannot save him. His father's legacy cannot save him. The only thing that can save him now is if he comes to me, personally, and begs for mercy. Now get out of here before I decide that sending a message is not enough, and I just remove you from the equation entirely." Hank and his men left. They drove back to Vernon Keller's ranch as fast as their trucks could carry them. And when they told Vernon what had happened, when they described the man on the porch and the invisible shooters and the message about the New York Times, Vernon Keller did something he had never done before in his entire life. He panicked. You have to understand who Vernon Keller was to understand why Bumpy's strategy was so effective. Vernon had been born into power. His father was a judge, his grandfather a territorial governor. He had never faced real opposition in his life. The local Navajo were too scared and too poor to challenge him. The state government was bought and paid for. Even the federal authorities looked the other way because Vernon's family had connections in Washington. Vernon had never met someone he could not buy, threaten, or kill. And now, here was Bumpy Johnson, a man from a world Vernon did not understand, using tactics Vernon had never encountered. Instead of coming with guns, Bumpy came with information. Instead of threatening violence, Bumpy threatened exposure. Instead of attacking Vernon's body, Bumpy attacked his reputation. Vernon spent 48 hours trying to figure out what to do. He called his brother, the senator, but his brother was suddenly unavailable. He called his contacts in the state attorney general's office, but they were nervous, asking questions about reporters from New York who had been making inquiries. He called the sheriff, who told him that federal marshals had been spotted in the county, asking about missing persons cases going back 20 years. Everything was falling apart. Vernon's entire world, the world his family had built over 3 generations, was crumbling around him. And at the center of it all was one man from Harlem who should not have even been there. On August 27, 1954, Vernon Keller made his decision. If he could not stop Bumpy Johnson with money or connections, he would stop him the old-fashioned way. He would kill everyone who knew anything. He would burn down the evidence. He would bury the problem in the desert like he had buried so many problems before. Vernon gathered every man he had, 23 in total, plus 6 deputies that the sheriff personally sent to help. He loaded them into trucks and cars, armed them with rifles, shotguns, and pistols, and in the early hours of August 28th, he led them toward the reservation. His plan was simple: kill Bumpy Johnson and his men. Kill Joseph and Margaret Bearclaw. Kill Sarah Whitehorse. Burn down the trading post and every piece of evidence inside. Then find the other families who had talked and silence them too. By the time the sun rose, there would be no witnesses, no evidence, no story, just another tragedy in the desert that nobody would ever investigate. But Bumpy Johnson had been waiting for exactly this move. See, that is what Vernon never understood. Bumpy had been playing chess while Vernon was playing checkers. Bumpy had deliberately provoked Vernon into attacking because Bumpy knew something that Vernon did not. The federal marshals who had been spotted in the county were not just asking questions. They were positioning themselves. Congressman Mitchell had made calls to the Justice Department. The prosecutor, Thomas Reed, had coordinated with the FBI. A reporter from the New York Times was already on a plane to Phoenix with a photographer and a film crew. Bumpy had turned Vernon's attack into a trap. When Vernon's convoy of trucks and cars arrived at the Bearclaw trading post at 4:30 in the morning, they expected to find a sleeping household, easy targets. What they found instead was a battleground. Bumpy had spent 3 days fortifying the trading post, sandbags in the windows, strategic cover positions around the property. He had also reached out to the Navajo families that Joseph Bearclaw knew, the ones who had lost daughters to Vernon Keller. These were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were farmers and shepherds, men who had been beaten down by decades of oppression, but they were also fathers and brothers and sons who had watched their families be destroyed. And when Bumpy Johnson, this stranger from New York who had no obligation to help them, asked if they would stand with him, 27 men said yes. So when Vernon Keller's convoy pulled up, expecting to massacre a handful of people, they found themselves facing 30 armed men in fortified positions. And in the hills overlooking the trading post, unseen in the darkness, were 6 more men, not Navajo. Federal marshals who had been watching Vernon Keller's ranch for the past 24 hours, who had followed his convoy here and who were now documenting everything with cameras and recording equipment. Vernon stepped out of his truck. He could not see the fortifications in the darkness, could not see the men in position. All he saw was the trading post, quiet, seemingly vulnerable. "Move in," Vernon ordered. "Hit them hard and fast. Burn it all." His men advanced. They got maybe 50 yards before the first shot rang out. Illinois Gordon, positioned on the roof, put a bullet through the engine block of the lead truck. The truck sputtered, stopped, blocking the road. Then the night exploded. Shots came from everywhere, from the windows of the trading post, from the water tank, from the rocks and trees around the property. Vernon's men dove for cover, firing wildly into the darkness, hitting nothing. 3 of Vernon's men went down in the first 30 seconds. Not killed. Bumpy had been specific about that. Wound them. Do not kill them if you do not have to, because dead men cannot testify. Vernon screamed for his men to fall back, but the retreat was chaos. More men went down, shot in the legs, the arms, the shoulders. They screamed and crawled, trying to get back to the trucks. And through it all, Bumpy Johnson walked calmly across the battlefield. He carried no gun. He did not need one. He walked toward Vernon Keller, who was crouching behind his truck, fumbling with a rifle, his hands shaking too badly to load it. Bumpy stopped about 10 feet away. Vernon looked up, saw him standing there in the moonlight, and something in Vernon's face broke. "Please," Vernon whispered. "Please, I will give you anything. Money, land, whatever you want." Bumpy looked at him. 19 girls, 19 families destroyed, 20 years of terror. And you think money can make that right? Vernon was crying now. They were just, you do not understand. Bumpy crouched down, so he was eye level with Vernon. "I understand perfectly. You thought these people were less than human. You thought you could take whatever you wanted, because there was no one to stop you." He stood up. "You were wrong. The federal marshals emerged from the hills. They had documented everything. Vernon's attack, his men firing on the trading post, the evidence of a coordinated assault against civilians. Over the next hour, 19 of Vernon's men were arrested. 6 were too wounded to move and had to wait for ambulances. And Vernon Keller, the man who had believed he was untouchable, was handcuffed and loaded into a federal vehicle. As they drove him away, Bumpy Johnson stood on the porch of the Bearclaw trading post and watched. Joseph Bearclaw stood next to him. "This is not over," Joseph said quietly. "Vernon has money, lawyers, connections. He will find a way to escape justice." Bumpy shook his head. "No, he will not." The story ran in the New York Times 3 days later. Front page, above the fold, 19 girls missing. A state senator's brother accused of human trafficking. Federal investigation reveals decades of abuse against Native American families. The story included photographs of Sarah Whitehorse's wounds, photographs of the wooden cross where she had been left to die, photographs of Vernon Keller in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage. It included testimony from survivors, from families who had been afraid to speak for 20 years, and it included a quote from an unnamed source, a source that anyone who knew Bumpy Johnson would recognize. "No one is untouchable, not when they prey on the helpless, not when they believe their power makes them above consequences." The reaction was immediate. Vernon's brother, the senator, resigned within a week. The sheriff, who had been on Vernon's payroll, was arrested by state police. 3 deputies fled the state and were never seen again. And Vernon Keller himself, facing federal charges that could not be dismissed by local judges or swept under the rug by friendly prosecutors, was convicted on 14 counts of kidnapping, assault, and civil rights violations. He was sentenced to life in prison. He died in a federal penitentiary in 1967, stabbed by another inmate whose daughter had disappeared under circumstances that reminded him of Vernon's crimes. But the story does not end there. Because what happened in Arizona in August of 1954 did not stay in Arizona. Word spread. In Harlem, the story of what Bumpy had done traveled through the streets like wildfire. Not just what he had done to protect his own community, but what he had done for people who were not his community at all. For a young girl he had never met, from a nation he had no connection to, Bumpy Johnson had started a war, and he had won. The message was clear. Bumpy Johnson did not just protect Harlem. Bumpy Johnson protected the powerless wherever he found them. That reputation followed him for the rest of his life. It made men think twice before crossing him. Not because they feared his violence, though they did, but because they knew that Bumpy Johnson operated by a code, that he would go to any length, travel any distance, fight any enemy to stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves. And in Harlem, the community that he loved, that code became law. Sarah Whitehorse recovered. The physical wounds healed slowly. The psychological wounds took longer. But she recovered. She moved to Albuquerque, finished her education, and became what she had always wanted to be, a teacher. She spent 35 years teaching on the reservation, helping children who reminded her of herself, children who had been told they were worthless, that they did not matter, that the world would never see them as fully human. She taught them differently. She taught them about their history, their culture, their worth. And on the wall of her classroom, next to photographs of her students and their achievements, she kept one other photograph, a picture of a well-dressed black man standing in the Arizona desert, squinting into the sun. Underneath, a handwritten note, "The man who saved my life." August 1954. Sarah visited Harlem once. In 1963, she was 25 years old then, confident and strong in ways she had never been as a girl. She walked into Small's Paradise, asked to see Bumpy Johnson, and was led to his table in the back. Bumpy was 58 years old then. The years had softened him in some ways, hardened him in others. But when he saw Sarah Whitehorse standing in front of him, his face broke into a genuine smile. The first genuine smile his men had seen in months. "Sarah," he said, "look at you." Sarah sat down across from him. They talked for 3 hours. About her life, her work, the students she taught, about his health, which was declining, about Harlem, which was changing, about the strange ways that one moment in time can connect two people forever. Before she left, Sarah gave Bumpy something, a small leather pouch, beaded in the traditional Navajo style. Inside was a stone from the desert, smooth and red, the color of the rocks near the trading post where she had almost died. "My grandmother made this before she passed," Sarah said. "She told me to give it to you. She said you carry the spirit of a warrior, that you were sent to us for a purpose." Bumpy took the pouch, held it in his hands. There was something in his eyes that his men had never seen before, something that looked almost like tears. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Tell your grandmother's spirit thank you too." Sarah stood up. "Mr. Johnson, what you did for me, for my people, we will never forget." "Never." Bumpy nodded. "I know you will not. That is why I did it." Sarah Whitehorse walked out of Small's Paradise that day. She never saw Bumpy Johnson again. He died 5 years later, in 1968, of a heart attack. But she heard about it. Everyone in America who paid attention to such things heard about it. And on the day they buried Bumpy Johnson, Sarah Whitehorse drove to the highest point on the reservation, faced east toward Harlem, and said a prayer in the language of her ancestors. A prayer for the warrior who had saved her life and changed the future for generations of Navajo children who would never know his name. The story of Bumpy Johnson and the native girl tied to the cross became legend. Not just in Harlem, but across the country. It was told and retold, exaggerated in some versions, simplified in others. But the core of it remained true. Bumpy Johnson found a child who had been crucified and left to die. He did not have to help her. He had nothing to gain. But he stayed. He fought. He won. He burned down a criminal empire that had terrorized a community for 20 years. And he did it not for money, not for power, not for territory. He did it because it was right. That is the story that history forgot. The story that proves Bumpy Johnson was more than just a gangster, more than just the godfather of Harlem. He was a man who understood something that most people never learn. Real power is not about what you take. Real power is about what you protect. Harlem remembers. The Navajo Nation remembers. And now you remember too. That is the legacy of Bumpy Johnson. Not the violence, not the crime, not the wars with Dutch Schultz or the Italians or the corrupt police. The legacy is simpler than that and more profound. Bumpy Johnson stood up for people who could not stand up for themselves. He protected the powerless from the powerful. And when nobody else would help, when the system failed, when the law looked the other way, Bumpy Johnson did what needed to be done. August 17th, 1954, 3:47 in the afternoon. A dirt road in the Arizona desert, a wooden cross, a dying girl, and a man from Harlem who changed everything. That is the story. That is the legend. That is Bumpy Johnson. If this story moved you, if you understand what it means to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on those notifications because we are telling the stories that the history books forgot. The stories of a man who played chess while everyone else played checkers. A man who understood that loyalty, honor, and justice are more valuable than all the money in the world. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done if you found that girl in the desert? Would you have helped her? Would you have walked away? Would you have been willing to start a war for a stranger? Leave your answer below. And share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Someone who needs to understand that one person can make a difference. One person can change the world. One person can stand between the wolves and the lambs and say, no more. That was Bumpy Johnson. That is his legacy. And as long as people tell these stories, that legacy will never die.